Okay, thank you everybody for joining another Prog Report podcast. So far, these have been turning out pretty successful. We've had some great guests, some great topics, and really great number of downloads and eyeballs and listens and all those kind of stats. We're charting on iTunes and etc. So if you are just catching this for the first time, you can catch other podcasts on progreport.com. We're on iTunes, on Google Play, on our YouTube channel, and everywhere else on Facebook and Twitter and so on. Today, we have another great panel, two guys that I'm really happy to have joining me to discuss another one of my favorite bands. And, you know, at some points we might talk about some of the biggest bands in the world, like Dream Theater or, you know, something like that. And at other times we might talk about bands that maybe deserve to be a lot bigger than they are, which may be the case with this band. You may or may not agree, but my hope is that other people might listen to this and decide that they need to check out this band as well, if you don't already know about the Deer Hunter, which is the band we're going to do a top 5 on today. So the first guest I'm going to introduce is Jordan Blum, who is a great reporter, reviewer. He's written for Prog Magazine, for Pop Matters, Rebel Noise, Classic Rock Society. He's written some things for the Prog Report. He's an author himself, and he's super well versed in all things Deer Hunter. So Jordan, say hi.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
Cool. Well, thanks for joining, man. I appreciate it. You taking the time to do it.
Thanks for the introduction. Very flattering.
Did I cover most things okay? Was that all right?
Yeah, I mean, I also write for Metal Injection, if anybody cares.
Yeah, we left one out. All right, cool. And so also, I'm really, really excited to have, when we can get a great musician of another one of the bands that we like to join and come and talk about another band. It's always a lot of fun. So I'm really happy to welcome Connor Green from Haken.
Hi. I didn't know if I should talk beforehand, so I just kept quiet.
So if anybody's not familiar with Haken, which I can't imagine if you're listening to this podcast, you must be a fan of Haken at this point. One of the, I don't know if up and coming is a fair assessment anymore. You guys are already there. I mean, you guys are really have a big name for yourselves. You're touring all over the world. It's 10th anniversary just celebrated. I mean, talk about what's been going on with the band lately.
Well, we just did Cruise to the Edge, which was fun. That's Yes's big cruise, and we coming off of doing a lot of the Mike Portnoy Shattered Fortress stuff last year, and so now we've kind of moved on to back, I should say, to Haken stuff. Kind of working on some new material here and there, trying to get some good stuff going on. So lots of things happening behind the scenes, and eventually we'll be able to talk more about that. But yeah. What's your sort of downtime like when the band's not recording right now? You guys just finished the tour, like you said, and all that, so you have a few months off. I mean, you get to just sort of relax. Are you writing? Do you play in other bands on the side? What do you do? Yeah, well, I mean, obviously writing's kind of happening all the time. Sometimes a lot of writing, sometimes it's just a normal amount of writing that musicians do. And I obviously work for other musical groups, no bands really, but just kind of, playing bass for people that need it around town and locally. And the other guys do the same thing. I think they teach, I teach, they do session work, I do, all this stuff. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, they have our hands in a lot of different baskets, so to speak. If that's the expression, I don't even know what it is. It's there's not a lot of downtime really. It's just kind of we're not touring the world, I guess. Right. Yeah. Well, cool. I know. I guess we're all anticipating the next album, which is going to be great. I'm glad things are going well for the band. I know. So the reason why you were invited, and I thank you for joining this discussion on the Deer Hunter, is I know you're a big fan of that band, and all the guys from Haken always talk about on Facebook. I see different things about how you guys like that band, and I did a previous thing with Ross Jennings, Haken singer,
about a month ago, and he even brought them up and in what he was talking to me about. So how long have you been a fan of the Deer Hunter, and why the sort of, I don't know, fandom of Haken towards that band, I guess?
Yeah, okay. So I've been listening to them since I was in high school, which was, I guess, 2010, 2011-ish. And they were one of the first really progressive bands that I started listening to. I mean, obviously, I got into Haken and Dream Theater kind of first. Those are my gateway bands into progressive music, I guess. And when I heard them, because they're not, your typical kind of prog metal, prog rock sound. Like, to me, that, that's prog and progressive music so ambiguous, it doesn't really matter what it sounds like as long as it's progressive, which I guess is, subjective as well. But I don't know, there was just something about, that had the story element with, Act 1, Act 2, etc., which when I learned about the band, the only albums that were out were Acts 1 through 3.
Right.
So that was my first foray into the band, and I was like, oh man, all these are connected, and I don't know, the music's so varied, and it's not just one sound. They go from a rock song to a like a string quartet kind of piece to horns to all this stuff, and I don't know, I think the variety is what initially attracted me.
That's what for me too, and I want to ask you guys about that, because to me, I find it weird that when I hear them, and I hear especially Casey's voice, Casey's the singer, they sound like they could have fans of the same fans that like Death Cab for Cutie, or Snow Patrol, or I don't know, like sort of those alternative bands that are a little bit more experimental, right? But for whatever reason, they haven't found the same success as those bands, and seem to end up more in the prog world, like touring with Coheed and Cambria, and they're on tour right now with Between the Buried and Me, and stuff that seems like it wouldn't make sense. And I don't know how that ended up for them. Maybe that's their preference, but I always wonder, wouldn't they make more sense touring with like a Death Cab or something?
Yeah, well, they definitely would, but the thing is with a band like the Deer Hunter, they're so hard to just put into, okay, this is a pop band, this is a pop rock band that can tour with Snow Patrol or something. It's like people, they need this really cohesive, I shouldn't say cohesive, what's the word? They need this band that sounds the same on every record.
Maybe that's what is missing for that audience on the pop side, is that not every song, like a song, we'll get into it, I'm sure, but one of their later songs, like Waves, seems like an obvious pop hit to anyone, but very few of their songs sound like that, right? So I guess that must be it. I mean, it's befuddling to me. I just saw them last weekend at down here with Leprous and Between the Buried and Me, and the three bands couldn't be more different. But all the audience likes all three bands, and I think that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people in the Deer Hunter group on Facebook asking who Between the Buried and Me are, because I'm seeing them on Saturday, and I love all three bands. But if I didn't love Between the Buried and Me, then I would think, if I love the Deer Hunter but not Between the Buried and Me, and I heard Between the Buried and Me, I would think that they really don't go together.
Right.
It is an interesting lineup.
Yeah, but if you talk to Tommy Rogers from Between the Buried and Me, he loves the Deer Hunter. I mean, that's like the same way you guys from Haken like them. So it's a weird thing with that band, and maybe that's why not as many people have realized the band's music, and so that's what I hope to maybe do here today, is sort of shed a light on that. And so explaining a little bit more about the band, it started with this Act 1 album, and they've since, over many years, completed 5 albums called Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5. And they have longer titles, but you can look those up. I don't remember all of those. So we're going to start, and the 5 acts together tell this whole story about a character that is the Deer Hunter, and that's how the whole thing started. And there's themes that intertwine between all 5 albums. There's stuff on the first album that appears on the 5th album, and those were recorded 7 years apart. So that's what's really interesting. And I'm going to admit something, that I was not a fan of the band until the 5th album, until Act 5.
Oh.
I knew of them. I thought they were more of an alternative band from the couple of things I had heard, and I never dove into the other songs. And when I got Act 5, it was one of those things for me where I lost my shit over it. Like, I went, how did I miss this? And that's only happened to me a couple of times where immediately I went and got all the records right away and dove headfirst into it like crazy. Porcupine Tree I only discovered with In Absentia, so
Me too,
I lost my mind over them, and I come to find they had like 6 albums before, which was amazing. So I love that when you can sort of dive into it and there's all this music all at once. But so I come from learning about the Deer Hunter from Act 5. I didn't hear Act 1 first. So I think that's sort of an interesting actually way to look at it. Because I'm not sure listening to Act 1 first by itself, which only has 7 or 8 songs, and I think only maybe 4 or 5 with lyrics, with singing. That's a really weird album. So we'll start on that. So Jordan, why don't you go first on your choice for Act 1 and explain, a little bit about it?
Yeah, well, I discovered them with Act 3, was between Act 3 and the Color Spectrum. And now when I think about, as you just said, like introducing somebody to them, I probably would start with Act 1 just because, as you said, there's a lot of repeats and themes. So my choice is maybe the obvious one. We'll see what you two have, but I pick City Escape.
Not my choice, so good.
Yeah, that's good. After Battissimo del Fuoco, which sets the precedent for the vocal rows that they use on later albums too. City Escape to me is in a way the first sign of them and the musicianship behind them. It's a heavier song, which I find is sort of indicative of the first 2 albums, is the heaviness. But it always reminds me of the Mars Volta. Yeah, and it's one of the more like progressive metal songs almost. But the changes it's just a very progressive song, and there's so many changes in it, especially for a song that's not even 6 minutes. It's about 6 minutes. It goes into progressive metal territory, then it almost goes into like vaudevillian territory, which foreshadows later stuff. It's just a very diverse and dynamic and ambitious song.
Yeah,
and it just grabs you.
The fondness for cooking history, revealing thoughts of mystery. In the heat of the night, a woman wealthy of a Paris bride erased a harlot's life.
What about you, Connor?
Let me preface this by saying it's every song, like in these acts, it's impossible to choose just one that's like, but I'll try, and yeah, okay. So my choice is 1878, and I guess for me, I think what got me with this one was first the groove, like right away, is like this kind of veiled 7 groove, and it just something was really neat about it. But then when I heard the chorus, I was like, oh, there's this voice that I hear that's not Casey's, and I love that voice because I'm a fan of that band too. So the chorus, there's this call and response thing between Casey and this guy called Dan Nigro who sang for As Tall as Lions. It's another band that's no longer together, but hearing these 2 voices that I love that complement each other so well, and it's probably maybe not the most melodic, but the melody's kind of speak to me a certain way. I just love it. And then the end has this like organ solo. I don't know.
Yeah.
All of the sounds that trickle past your introspective ear, an attempt to discover what's filling another hole for the night, no self-control for the night, another hole for the night, lose myself, save my life, save my
So I love 1870. That's absolutely one of my favorites. I'm gonna, just to show the further diversity of this album, I'm gonna pick "The Pimp and the Priest," which is the song right after, which that becomes that whole kind of vaudevillian. I guess that's the perfect word for it, with like horns and trumpets and starts to tell this. Significant characters with the pimp and the priest and all this stuff that sort of happens later. And we're not going to delve into the whole story on this because there's blogs for days that you could find online, and people have gone not right. Have you seen that stuff, right, where people analyze the story? It's crazy.
I have a bookmark.
Yeah. So, what I loved when I went back, like I said, after listening to 5, I started going back, and when you discover Act 1, you're like, from 1878 to The Pimp and the Priest to then this amazing sort of epic ballad with His Hands Match His Tongue, which comes right after. I mean, it is one song after the next that has nothing sound-wise to do with the one before it. And it's just brilliant. That on the surface makes it a brilliant album. So I'm going to go with The Pimp and the Priest on that one, which I think is great.
That was going to be my choice, but then I decided on City Escape.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That brings us to Act 2, which I think is really shows a growth for the band and is very different from Act 1, right? There's a lot more rock on this album. There's a lot more sort of explosive songs. Where do you go with this one, Jordan?
Well, I think overall, I think this is still my favorite of all their albums. I don't know why. I think it maybe is the most diverse and the most raw.
I think raw is a good word for it. It's less of the overblown sort of orchestrated production that ends up on the other records.
In a sense, it's like the most. I think it's in a sense the most stripped down record. Kind of. So the one this one is. I mean, I had trouble with all of them. I love Evicted. I love Red Hands. But I had to settle on the last one, Vital Vessel Vindicates, because I just love. I don't know. It's kind of like it's got a whimsical start, and it just. I mean, they do such a good job of ending their albums, and not so much foreshadowing where it's going to go, but just leaving you in suspense, almost like a cliffhanger.
Right.
So aside from the kind of carnivalistic whimsy of it, the real reason I chose this one. And the real reason I didn't choose The Pimp and the Priest is because, as you mentioned before, the continuity between the albums, and then this one ends with the reference to the Pimp and the Priest with the Sing Softly, Sing Me to the Lake reprise,
Right.
which like sends chills down my spine when that comes back. So that's really the reason I picked it. Is it's almost, it may be the first callback to a previous piece, which they would go on to do, and that's one of their trademarks.
Right. Yeah, I think that is true with that. I think when I interviewed Casey a long time ago, I think he pointed that one out with the Pimp and the Priest being the first repeating theme that they went for. Connor, what about you?
Well, I re-listened to this record. I same as Jordan. I think this is probably my favorite. It was the first one I heard years and years ago, and I had trouble with it too. But I think the obvious choice after I listened to the record was the Lake and the River. Once that evicted theme comes in like halfway through, and then you hear it as a tune later on, it's just the whole thing. There's not one part of the song, and it's 9.5 minutes. There's not one part of the song that I'm bored at. It's engaging for 9.5 minutes, and if you can do that, then yeah.
His leaves were bold extremities with great control. Wasted alone, he died alone. You'll believe what you're meant to believe. In the hands of gods, we're never responsible. Wait to see what you're meant to see. The veil lifts when you expose your soul.
When I see them, I've seen them a couple of times live. This seems to be the album they leave out, though. Have you noticed that at all?
Yeah, I don't think he wants to play Red Hands anymore, period.
Right.
Yeah, and actually that leads into my choice, which is Red Hands. And I don't know why he doesn't like that song. But unless you've read why, I'm not sure.
Well, I've noticed at shows people yell it out, and I have heard him play it acoustically once. But I think it was just one of those songs. It's it's the most kind of accessible one on the album. I think when first released it, there were loads of people obsessing about this song only, and I could be wrong, but maybe there's a bit of he doesn't want to satisfy this kind of like pop thing where they want the hit song played, so he just doesn't play it almost out of spite. It almost seems
He has that about him, and I don't mean to do it, but going back to in speaking to him and also reading other interviews, he likes to not write what people expect. He likes to not write the obvious. I think that's probably it. I mean, Red Hands is blatantly a hit single to me, and it has a great hook in it. And the power at the end and the build where he brings back the chorus and there's this shout back from the band towards the end. That is so incredible to me and gets me so amped up. I mean, that song blows me away.
If you're not said, my darling, I would never say those words to you. I was pulling out my heart so I could pin it to my sleeve. On display for you to see, I'm on display. Because you can't be red-handed if you're not red-handed. My darling, I would never say those words to you. I was pulling out my heart so I could pin it to my sleeve. On display for you to see, I'm on display. Because you can't be red-handed if you're not red-handed.
Another thing to note on Act 2 is that this is where they start the bitter sweets. So there's part 1 and 2, and then part 3, and then those get repeated as other songs. Bitter part 4 and 5 and 6, I think, later on later albums. So he was planning all of this all along, which I just think is genius. I will say this is interesting that you guys. So you guys came into the band earlier and heard this album early, and this is your favorite record. And actually, for me, I think it might be my least favorite. So I wonder if that's because I heard it sort of towards the end. I went backwards. So I wonder if that's, how that works out. But I do love it, and it is fantastic. And all right, so I think for me, once you start getting into Act 3, you start getting into the real sort of more fleshed out material. And I think this is for me. It's hard to pick between 3, 4, and 5 as what their best album is. I think they're all perfection.
I think I love all of it, but I still think 3 is my least favorite of the 5.
Wow. Okay. See, this isn't no accounting for taste. But okay. So what would be your choice from 3 though, Jordan? We'll go with you.
To remind myself which one I picked. Oh yeah. Maybe a waste of a vote, but I picked the opener, Writing on a Wall. I don't know if it's not really even like a song.
That's like an intro vocal thing, but okay.
Yeah. I mean, it was again, like with all of it, it's a toss between 3 at least. But I settled on that one because I think it's one of their trademarks is to have a vocal row like this, to have an opening sort of a cappella moment. And between this one and the opener on Act 1, I always, struggle which one I like more, but I think this one is more complete. I think it's warm, and it really reminds me of, the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson at his height when he was doing stuff like this.
Yeah, no, I do love this opening for sure.
Come away, young man, where the ground is red and you need a master breathe. Oh, it's been so hard, but your luck could change if you just roll up your sleeves. We had tried our best to roam before, but it didn't get you far. Now we're here again with the wish to end your agonizing scar. Open eyes, young man, with the empty hands and a heart that never vain. You will lose much more in the vicious war as the present stay the same. But the time to come will be all the sun, and you listen to our song. But we sing in vain, and the fact remains there is all we can
And it's very orchestral, and it's very bombastic in a different way than like City Escape or their other stuff before that. And it's just there's like a tonal shift, near the end too. That it's like very open and lively, but it's also kind of foreboding, which goes along with the kind of plot of Act 3, which we're not gonna get into, but it foreshadowed that, I think.
Well, this is also one of the heaviest albums, like subject matter wise, right? So, Connor, what do you got for this one?
Yeah, well, this one was probably the toughest for me to choose because there's a few of them that kind of go along this line of it's a heavy record, like it's bordering on that heavy rock metal region of music. But yeah, so in Cauda Venenum, the one after Writing on a Wall, that opening riff and the screaming kind of thing that Casey does, like the melodic screaming thing.
Yeah.
This is my favorite example of that, and it's probably like, for the Deer Hunter, all the material. I think my favorite stuff that Casey writes are the more chilled, emotive kind of stuff where it's all about the melody and the instrumentation is orchestral or little acoustic guitar here and that. All the chilled stuff, it kind of gets me. But for this record, I think that in Cauda Venenum, just the sheer heaviness of it, and hearing it live is like, oh man, you really feel it. And, yeah, I think I have to go with that one.
We're biting our tongues, an apparition awoken with an urge to wound and occupy. Whoever said this was easy? The majesty's massacre fought the fields of lead. Back to your body now, surely rushes the blood to your head. Tell your head. Yeah, now with the hands alive, these stars moves at night, and we cry. We cannot allow this. It's a symbol with ideals for idle as they last for more. If we settle the
He still plays from this album. There's a few songs that seem to always make it to the live show, especially Mustard Gas, which is just massive live, and that's also an intense song with sort of real heavy. But I just love the diversity on this album. Like, I love the opening. You chose both of you songs 1 and 2, which open the record, and then there's a lot of heavy stuff in the middle, and then you get into a song like This Beautiful Life, which is like Beach Boys or something, and then Go Get Your Gun, which is like Dixieland or something, and then for me it's the ending. I'm gonna pick Life and Death, the last song, which is bordering on possibly my favorite song by the band altogether. But when you listen to it with the song Son leading into the song Father, which is both are just these amazing orchestral, somber, the emotion between those songs and the melody and the whole thing. It's just for a guy to be able to write that on the same album that he wrote a song like Mustard Gas and all this other stuff. I just don't know how he does it. That hit me really hard. And Life and Death, not lyrically. Lyrically, it is what it is also, but I love the melody. I love the whole grand mega orchestra massiveness of Life and Death at the end. It absolutely just floored me the first time I heard it.
Like those last three are, I kind of, it's hard for me to see them as separate songs. They're very much sweet. And I was going to pick Life and Death too, because as you said, like he shows such diversity and like going from the bombastic rock sound, if not metal, and just it's very grandiose. And then even like the transition from Father into this, it's so like soft and quaint, and then it's just his voice is so tender during it, and
it's a brilliant song, brilliant. The whole thing about it is amazing.
Yeah. And he's singing, "One of these days you will learn to be loved again." It's a tearjerker moment, to be honest.
Yeah, listen, I'm one of these guys that always goes with the music first. If the music hits me, I'll delve into the lyrics and sort of see what the song's about. That's just my thing. But if you're somebody that is really focuses on lyrics, the stuff in here is powerful, like really well written and intense and just really good to dive into. If you like that kind of stuff, also.
These days you will learn to love again. And these days you will learn to love again. And these days you will learn to love again. And these days you will learn to love again. And these days you will learn to love again. One of these days you will learn to love again. One of these days you will learn to love again. One of these days you will learn to love.
Following the path of the band after Act 3, Casey took a break, wanted to go write some different stuff. They did the Color Spectrum stuff and Migrant, which is a sort of a great pop record. But we're not covering those because we're just sticking to the Act albums. Then he comes back and writes and records Act 4 and 5 at the same time and releases them about a year apart. And so we'll go with Act 4. And Jordan, what do you got?
I think I picked the obvious one, but I had to go with Waves.
Yeah,
it just blows me away every time I hear it. It's one of the. I mean, again, I don't think he writes happy songs necessarily, but this one for a song that's not thematically happy, I guess it sounds very upbeat. It is very poppy. It's very bright. It's very warm. Going back to the Beach Boys thing, this really does remind me of something like from Pet Sounds or Smile.
Yeah.
And there's just, I don't know. I think it's one of the catchiest songs they've written, especially the bridge. The whole I was feeling this ship was sinking. You were telling me to just keep drinking. That whole part is such a turn, but it's hypnotic, and it's just so. It's one of those songs that I think could get them mainstream attention, and it's one of those songs that is layered, but it's not nuanced and like weird enough to turn people off. I think it's one of those songs that pretty much everybody has to like.
Well, I think the best part about him writing that song is that prior to this, he signed with these producers to try and write a pop record, and was hating it so much that he was intentionally writing this pop stuff that he bailed on the deal and the money that was going to come with it to go back and write the Act albums, and ends up writing the poppiest song he's ever written with Waves. Almost, which makes no sense, but it's almost because he wasn't doing it for a particular reason, he ends up writing this song.
Strays on a stay, you'll see. Oh, anchored the engine to a canyon far beneath. Water rushed up from the boards below, so I started slicking my hair with the kerosene. You knew the way things were. You knew the way they would be. We knew exactly how it ended.
What do you have from this album?
Okay, this one was easy for me. So the night on the town, I was like at an airport somewhere, getting ready to fly to somewhere, and I saw this was released. It was the first one that he released as a single, which is odd. It's a 9-minute tune, and when I first heard it, I was like, oh man, I was at my gate. I was like, I need to hear this now because I'm going to be on a plane for 8 hours. So I put it in my headphones. I heard it. It was just like seriously welled up. Like, I was like, oh no, I'm embarrassed. But it's got all the things I like about the Deer Hunter, which is I love when he uses these themes over and over again. And I heard a theme from when I was in high school on Act 2 or whatever, and then I'm hearing it again when I'm more of an adult. In this context, on this kind of set, I don't know. It was just the whole thing kind of hit me. And he's got like 3 or 4 themes in this that are reused, but he's also got like the chorus. Not chorus. There's this build-up section, more melodic section, kind of halfway through, which is from Act 3, Untitled 1. It was like one of the demo.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Record. And it was always one of my favorite pieces he ever did, but I wanted it, to be a real song, and then it became a part of Night on the Town. It was just like the whole thing came together. It was just the perfect song for me.
Must we remind of exchanges existing so long ago? Would we arrive at agreeable musings, sentimental or just confusing? We lost what we had, then we took it back. Friends in the gutter, enjoy one another. Just give yourself to the dust in the dirt where you stand. What will I see tonight in these eyes? And what will I know when the morning comes? What will I see tonight in these eyes? And what will I know when the morning comes? I'm not who you think I am. And even if I thought
No, that's an amazing song. This to me is my favorite album if I had to pick one, because it's everything from parts 1 through 3, but just more like he actually had more time to sit and make it, and it's more diverse. It's all the styles. Every song is easily accessible. And every time you hear one of the songs, you think this is the best song on the album, and then another one comes on, and you're like, well, you've got to be kidding me. Like, now this one? And that's how I felt when I was listening to this album. And it's the album when I was doing my book, I wanted to represent the Deer Hunter some way in it, and I used this album as that because I felt like it encompassed everything. And the song that I chose from it, Waves, would have easily been a choice for me as well. I went with the Bittersweet 4 and 5, which for me has that sort of Beatlesy, Supertramp, kind of bouncy pop thing. Maybe again going back to the vaudevillian stuff, but it's a little bit more poppy, more polished. And I just love that. But what I love even more about this album is, going from something like Night on the Town to the Squeaky Wheel, which is this great sort of pop song, to the Bittersweet stuff, to King of Swords, which is like a dance groove song.
That was an atypical one.
Yeah, I mean, Wait, which is sort of this chunky rock song that he likes to play live. I mean, the whole thing is, again, it's not one style on this album at all. It's just 15 completely different songs on one album, which is amazing to me. So that's my choice for that one.
I hear you looking for God. Well, I could show you the way just as long as you pay, but the price is going lead you to salvation with the right denomination. It all lies in your hands or in your pocketbook to be more demanding. Don't you tread too close to the line this time. Don't get led too close to the line this time. You went far too close to the line this time. The line this time. Hey, hey, kid, hey, kid, get it done. Hey, 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 kid, get it done.
Yeah, and then of course you have the reprise from Act 2 of the "Hey Kid, get a God." I used to say
Right. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's
But-
it's just so cool. It's really cool stuff. And then one of my favorite reprises that he does is he takes the old haunt chorus and puts that in Act 5, which we'll get into. Which I love that one.
No, I was gonna say the end of the old haunt. There's somewhere at the beginning of the album that references Act 2 as well. I think it might be the end of. I think he references like the crux of the old haunt in Act 5, but at the end of the old haunt goes back to one of the previous albums too, but I forget.
Yeah, it's got the Lake and the River opening thing.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Act 5, which came out, I guess now a couple years ago. Again, another just brilliant masterpiece. The most similar album to another album. I think it follows in the same sort of style and approach as Act 4, which they wrote and recorded them at the same time. So I think that makes sense.
He seemed to, I pointed that out to him, and when I interviewed him when Act 5 came out, I interviewed him for Pop Matters, and I brought that up, and he seemed, it was just through text, so I didn't get like the tone, but he kind of seemed like he didn't like that idea that they were similar, but they absolutely are like two halves of a project.
Not in a bad way at all. I mean, there's still things on Act 5 that are completely out of left field. I mean, which, songs like Mr. Usher, which are, Frank Sinatra, 30s style song, and, there's stuff like that all over the place on this record. So, Jordan, what's your choice for Act 5?
They're all difficult. And initially, I just to go along with what you were saying, I initially thought that Act 4 was better. But I just listened to both of these two last week before even like really planning this podcast, and I think 5 is the superior of the two. And a big reason is for my choice is The Moon Awake, which, I mean, again, I see that as connected to Regress, and it's all one thing to me. But The Moon Awake to me is kind of the epitome of everything Casey Crescenzo does in one. It's just like, it's, the amalgamation of everything that's led up to it. And it's so impassioned and emotional and catchy. And then, the way it ends with the deer apparition is just,
that one part, the deer apparition, that sort of change, and that is one of the greatest musical bits on any album ever.
I totally agree. And again, like, I think like I have such an appreciation for genius like this that somebody can make something like this that I literally tear up when he gets to that part, because it's just like, there's very few things I've ever heard that I kind of equate to like hearing like heaven in music, and it's like a spiritual thing. But yeah, when he gets to that part, it's just like, it's the greatest thing.
When sins of signs to fathers come too heavy.
I agree with you, man. I agree. Connor, how about you?
Yeah, so I guess this is the compliment to The Moon Awake, but A Beginning, the last track.
Oh yeah.
You guys are stealing my songs.
Oh, sorry, man.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead. It's a good way to wrap it up. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like undeniably the most, to me, the most melodically satisfying song. And there's this part in the middle where you kind of feel the main character's, because he dies in this song basically. And for anyone that doesn't know the story,
spoiler alert.
That's late now,
Yeah.
You can feel like there's this like vocal swell where you can kind of imagine the breath leaving the character, and then the ending has this like Lake South piano theme. The whole thing it totally brings it all together, like all 5 acts.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my choices for this album were going to be The Moon Awake, and if not, it was going to be A Beginning. So, but I want to say that the Moon Awake is because of the part that you talked about, Jordan, which is the beginning of it is just sort of this great rock song, and it's everything that the band sort of sounds like, and then when it changes into that other part, which is just a home run, it's the greatest thing. And
it took me not to cut you off. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, it just took me, again, another few listens to catch that he brings that back at the end. I think that's the part Connor was talking about. What if the silence is broken by the ones you've loved? And it like this moment of like epiphany or optimism, and then the music swells, and then he brings back that Dear Apparition part, and it's genius. It's absolutely incredible.
The reason why also the beginning part, I think, is what I love about that is that, and Connor, you know this from some of the stuff that Haken does, and working with Mike and all the prog guys, Neil Morris, and all that stuff that you guys have always been involved with. And I love that stuff, and that's absolutely my favorite stuff. And it's not a criticism, but it's that he could have done that to end this Epic 5 album thing. He could have done the epic song with the drums and the orchestra. You know what I'm talking about? Where it builds into like this thing with lots of singers and guitar solos, ending it out with 10 minutes. He could have done that, and you would have excused him for it because it sort of makes sense as a way to end this. And what I thought was the genius of it was to end it in the exact opposite way, where it's just him with some strings, bringing back that melody. It's just pure genius way to end the whole thing.
Yeah, and then the reprise, as Connor mentioned, to that I thought that like piano motif reoccurs throughout the whole series, and it's almost like I distinctly remember hearing Act 5 for the first time, going, for a walk. The same way I heard Act 4, I went for a walk outside my apartment, and I could hear the end of Act 5, the swelling after he says, "A new beginning's waiting patiently," and it swells, and I thought he's going to bring back a melody. And in the leading moments leading up to it, I was thinking, like, what am I about to hear? And then it comes on, and I just like smiled. I was like,
yeah, I was really happy with the ending of the album. Really happy with it, for sure.
And as you said at the beginning of this whole podcast, like I love writing about all the genres as you do, and Connor, you love being a part of it, I'm sure. But if there's one band that I think is just criminally underrated and just, for lack of a better way to put it, pisses me off that nobody knows about them, it's the Deer Hunter, and it's because of the stuff we've been talking about. Like, how does nobody know about this?
Yeah.
Or few people know, I should say.
Before I close the curtain, fate uncertain, spirit to the dark, endlessly apart. Can I fall into the ocean, send my soul into the sea? No distant echoes haunting me, no further phantoms will I see. This silence held eternally. But
So I'm gonna just to pick another song since my first and second choices were taken. I'm gonna go with a song called Cascade, which is the song immediately after The Moon Awake. And the reason why I'm picking it is because if you go back to what I told you guys, which is I hadn't heard this band before, this album, and I heard the single Revival, and then I heard the opening, The Moon Awake, and whatever, and I'm already on board because that stuff's killer. And then so Cascade is like this weird, almost Carpenters kind of 60s pop song or something. I don't know how to explain it. And it's just really, really killer. And it just from hearing that second song, Following the Moon Awake, it completely hooked me into listening to the rest of the album and started the whole thing for me. So while it wouldn't be my first or maybe second choice, it's easily one of my favorite songs by the band. Yeah. And I don't know, what do you guys think of that song and some of the other stuff on this album?
I think it's a great song. I mean, it's structurally it's simpler than I think a lot of what they do, but that's not a criticism. It's just sort of more of an observation. But yeah, and it's just I keep saying the word catchy. It's just very easy to get into. Yeah, it's got a good hook. It's got, again, he screams, "Hate the sinner, never hate the sin," and he's one of the best vocalists I think around today, period, among many other qualities, and I think the song shows that.
Yeah, his voice is insane. Connor, any other sort of thoughts on the band? And I mean, do you know them? Have you met them or toured with them or anything in the past?
I don't really know them. I mean, I've had online correspondence with the bass player a lot. We've talked many times, and I've seen them live loads of times. But they're one of those guys. For like bands that I love, I don't really like to meet them. I don't know. It's just because I've loved them for so long, and if I meet them, it kind of shatters the whole mystique of them.
That's interesting.
Even if we're in a similar genre and play with similar bands and play similar music at times, it's like I just kind of want to keep it that way as long as I can. Yeah. But final thoughts. I mean, if anyone's been listening this long, they're probably a big fan of the band. But if you're just looking to get into them, don't concentrate too much on the story at first. Just listen to the 5 acts that are out, listen to any of the albums, and then go back and start reading the lyrics and getting into the story, because it's like listening to the albums for the first time again. Because the story, it's as far as concept records go, this is the only one besides Scenes from Memory where it's totally convinced me. The story is as good and as gripping as the music at times. So I don't know. For me,
I agree. I mean, I don't know that anybody's done something like this, 5 albums worth, where it all ties in together and the music is so broad. I can't think of another example.
I mean, I think like Coheed and Cambria, I think, is
close,
the most well-known band that does something like this. But
they're not musically this diverse, though.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is like, in terms of a branching narrative, I think they go for it. But musically, and I love Coheed and Cambria, but I think, I mean, even like I wouldn't say that Deer Hunters is the only band that sounds like this. I just discovered a great band called Dirt Poor Robins. There's the Family Crest. There's formerly the Reign of Kindo. There's even the Decemberists sometimes. But I think no other band does it nearly as well or confidently or with the diversity of the Deer Hunter. They're really one of a kind.
Yeah, no, I agree. Guys, thank you so much. I hope we enlightened anybody that listens onto the band, and I appreciate you guys both taking some time to talk about it and lend your voices to it.
No, thanks so much. I any chance I can get to talk about the Deer Hunter, I will.
That's what I figured. I'll have you both on again at some point to talk about something.
Awesome.
Maybe the next Haken album. All right. Thanks, Connor. Thanks, Jordan.
Yeah, take it easy.
All right, guys. Bye.
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 I've been running through the night again, trying to find